Mothman warned us before disaster. It was a crisp autumn evening in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where the air carried a chill that hinted at the approaching winter. The clock read 7:45 p.m., and the sky above was painted with hues of orange and purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. In the small town nestled along the Ohio River, life moved at a leisurely pace, but tonight would be different for the Carter family: Michael, his wife Emily, and their teenage son Jake. Little did they know, an encounter with something extraordinary was about to change their lives forever. The Carter family had gathered in their living room after dinner, settling in for a quiet evening together. Michael sat on the couch reading a newspaper while Emily worked on a knitting project nearby. Jake, engrossed in a video game, occasionally paused to comment on the news stories his father shared aloud. The atmosphere was calm, almost serene, until a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, startling them all. "What was that?" Emily asked, glancing toward the window. She rose from her seat and approached it cautiously, peering outside into the gathering darkness. Beyond the yard stretched a dense forest, its towering trees swaying gently in the breeze. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught a flash of something large and winged soaring silently through the trees. Her breath hitched and she turned back to her family, her voice trembling slightly. "Did you see that?" Michael set down his newspaper, curiosity piqued. He joined Emily at the window, squinting into the distance. For a moment, there was nothing but the rustling leaves and chirping crickets. Then, without warning, the creature reappeared, a massive figure with wings spanning at least 10 feet, its glowing red eyes piercing through the shadows like twin beacons. It hovered briefly before disappearing into the depths of the forest, leaving behind an unsettling silence. Jake dropped his controller, rushing over to join his parents at the window. "What was that thing?" he whispered, his voice filled with awe and fear. Michael shook his head, unable to offer an explanation. None of them had ever seen anything like it before. As they stood there, trying to process what they'd witnessed, a strange sensation settled over them, a feeling of being watched, as though unseen eyes lingered just beyond the tree line. Later that night, as the family prepared for bed, the memory of the winged creature continued to haunt them. Unable to shake the unease, Michael decided to do some research. He retrieved an old encyclopedia from the bookshelf and flipped through the pages, searching for any mention of similar sightings. To his surprise, he discovered references to a legendary entity known as the Mothman, a mysterious creature said to have appeared in Point Pleasant during the late 1960s, coinciding with a series of bizarre events culminating in a tragic disaster. The parallels between those accounts and their own experience were uncanny. The next morning, the Carters discussed their findings over breakfast. They agreed that the Mothman's reappearance couldn't be ignored. It felt like a warning, a sign of impending danger. Determined to uncover more information, they visited the local library, where they met Mr. Jenkins, an elderly librarian who had lived in Point Pleasant for decades. His eyes widened when they mentioned the Mothman, and he nodded knowingly. "Ah, yes," he said solemnly. "Many people dismissed it as mere folklore back then, but those who paid attention knew better. The Mothman always appears before tragedy strikes." His words sent shivers down their spines, but they pressed him for details. Mr. Jenkins recounted stories of other sightings of people describing the same glowing red eyes, the same silent flight, and the same ominous presence. He also spoke of the Silver Bridge collapse in 1967, which claimed the lives of 46 people, occurring shortly after the last reported sighting of the Mothman. The connection was undeniable, and the Carters left the library with a heavy sense of foreboding. Over the following days, strange occurrences began to unfold around Point Pleasant. Power outages plagued the town, leaving entire neighborhoods plunged into darkness. Strange noises echoed through the woods at night-low growls and haunting whispers that sent chills down the spines of anyone who heard them. Farmers reported livestock behaving erratically, refusing to enter certain areas near the riverbank. And then came the dreams-vivid nightmares plaguing each member of the Carter family, filled with images of collapsing structures and desperate screams. One evening, as the family sat together in the dim glow of candlelight due to another power outage, they heard a deafening screech that reverberated through the air, followed by the sound of flapping wings overhead. They rushed to the window, hearts pounding wildly, and saw the Mothman once again, this time perched atop a nearby telephone pole. Its red eyes locked onto theirs, staring intently as if delivering a final message. Without speaking, they understood the gravity of the situation. That night, the Carters made a decision. Packing only essentials, they left Point Pleasant, seeking refuge in a neighboring town. Days later, news broke of a catastrophic Eventa major bridge connecting Point Pleasant to Ohio had collapsed under mysterious circumstances, mirroring the tragedy of decades past. Scores of people lost their lives, and the town was left reeling in shock and grief. Though grateful for their escape, the Carters couldn't help but wonder about the Mothman's true nature. Was it a harbinger of doom, or a guardian trying to warn humanity of dangers yet unseen? Whatever the case, one thing was certain: their lives had been forever altered by the encounter. Even now, years later, whenever they hear the distant cry of birds or catch glimpses of shadows moving in the twilight, they pause and remember the glowing red eyes that saved them from disaster. In the end, the Carters learned to live with the knowledge that some mysteries are best left unanswered. Yet, deep down, they remain convinced that the Mothman is still out there watching, waiting, ready to deliver its warnings to those willing to listen. Next story. The Clapping Man of Missouri. He only comes when you clap back. It all started with a whisper in the wind, or so it seemed. I was sitting on the porch of my uncle's cabin late one evening, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring out into the darkness that stretched endlessly beyond the edge of town. It was August, and the air carried an oppressive heat that clung to your skin like a second layer of clothing. The crickets chirped rhythmically, their song blending seamlessly with the hum of cicadas. Everything felt normal until it didn't. Let me back up for a moment. My name is Alex, and I grew up in a small rural town called Willow Creek, nestled deep within the rolling hills of Missouri. If you've never been here, picture this: endless fields of golden corn swaying gently under the sun, narrow dirt roads winding through dense forests where sunlight barely penetrates, and a quiet stillness that lingers even when the world outside seems chaotic. But beneath that serene surface lies something darker, something whispered about by locals over hushed tones during late-night gatherings at the diner or around campfires deep in the woods. You see, Willow Creek has its own urban legenda story passed down through generations, told to children as cautionary tales and dismissed by adults as mere superstition. They call him the Clapping Man. As kids, we heard snippets of the tale from older siblings or friends whose parents had warned them not to stray too far into the woods after dark. According to legend, the Clapping Man roams the outskirts of Willow Creek, appearing only in places untouched by civilization: abandoned barns, desolate fields, and shadowy groves where trees twist unnaturally toward the sky. He's said to be drawn to sound specifically: clapping. Here's how the story goes. If you clap twice or more in these isolated areas, he will come, and once he arrives, there's no turning back. Locals always added a chilling caveat: he only comes if you clap back. At first glance, it sounds absurd, doesn't it? like some half-baked ghost story meant to scare restless teenagers into behaving themselves. But no one ever dared to test it not anymore. Not since. Well, let's just say there are reasons why people steer clear of certain parts of the forest now. Fast forward 10 years later, and I found myself returning to Willow Creek for what was supposed to be a peaceful summer break before starting graduate school. My childhood best friend, Jamie, had invited me to join her and a group of friends for a weekend camping trip near Old Hollow Lake, a secluded area surrounded by towering pines and thick underbrush. It wasn't exactly my idea of fun. I'd rather stay indoors reading books, but Jamie insisted, claiming it would help me reconnect with nature. We arrived late Friday afternoon, setting up our tents along the lake's rocky shoreline. As dusk settled over the landscape, casting long shadows across the water, Jamie pulled out a bottle of whiskey she'd smuggled in her backpack. "To celebrate," she said with a mischievous grin. We sat around the fire, laughing and sharing stories late into the night. That's when someone brought up the clapping man. "It's stupid," Jamie scoffed, taking a swig from the bottle. "Just another dumb legend to keep us scared of the woods. Who even believes that crap?" Her words hung heavy in the air, though none of us argued. There was an unspoken agreement among us. While most viewed the story as folklore, there remained a kernel of unease buried deep within each of us. Maybe it was the way the wind picked up suddenly, rustling the leaves overhead, or the distant howl of a coyote echoing through the valley. Whatever it was, it made the silence afterward feel heavier than usual. Then came the dare. "Fine," Jamie said, slamming the bottle onto a log. "If you guys don't believe me, let's prove it. Let's go find this clapping man and see if he actually exists." No one responded immediately. Instead, we exchanged nervous glances, the flickering flames reflecting off our faces. Finally, another friend, Sam, spoke up. "All right, but only if you do it first." Jamie smirked, standing up abruptly. "Deal." Armed with flashlights and a growing sense of dread, we ventured deeper into the woods surrounding the lake. The path narrowed quickly, forcing us to walk single file as the canopy above thickened, blocking out the moonlight. Every snap of a twig or scuttle of unseen creatures sent shivers down my spine, but I tried to convince myself it was just the alcohol talking. When we reached a clearing, Jamie stopped abruptly. She turned to face us, her eyes gleaming with determination or maybe bravado. "Watch closely," she said, raising her hands. Then, without hesitation, she clapped twice. The sound echoed through the clearing, reverberating off the trees before fading into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Just the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of insects. Then, a faint clap, distant yet unmistakable, answered hers. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Beside me, Sam muttered, "Did you hear that?" Before anyone could respond, another clap followed, closer this time, and then another, each one louder than the last, closing in like footsteps in the dark. Panic set in as Jamie stumbled backward, dropping her flashlight. The beam rolled away, illuminating the edge of the clearing and revealing a shadow moving between the trees. It wasn't human. By the time we scrambled back to camp, adrenaline coursing through our veins, the mood had shifted dramatically. No one joked anymore. Instead, we huddled together, speaking in hushed tones while keeping watch over the woods. Hours passed, and though the claps hadn't returned, none of us dared to sleep. That night, I couldn't shake the image of that shadow etched into my mind. It moved unnaturally, almost fluidly, slipping between trunks with ease. And those claps, they weren't random. They were deliberate, calculated, like someone or something was playing a game with us. Over the next few days, strange occurrences plagued our group. Faint clapping echoed in the distance whenever we ventured near the woods. Footsteps trailed behind us on empty paths. Once, I swore I saw movement out of the corner of my Aya figure crouched low among the cornfields, watching silently. When I turned to look directly, it vanished. But the worst part? None of us had initiated the ritual again, yet the claps persisted. One evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, I decided to take a walk along the lakeshore. The air was cooler now, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth. I walked aimlessly, trying to process everything that had happened. Was it real? Or were we simply projecting our fears onto the wilderness? As I stood gazing out at the water, the world around me seemed to pause. The wind died down completely, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. Even the crickets fell silent. That's when I heard the unmistakable sound of clapping. At first, it was soft, almost imperceptible. Then it grew louder, closer. Each clap resonated through the air, sending chills racing up my spine. I spun around, heart pounding, searching for the source. Nothing. Until the final clap came. It wasn't from behind me. It wasn't from the woods. It was right beside me, so close I could feel the vibrations in my chest. I screamed, bolting toward the campsite, ignoring the branches clawing at my arms and legs. By the time I reached the others, tears streamed down my face, and I couldn't form coherent sentences. Later, when I calmed enough to describe what I'd experienced, Jamie asked hesitantly, "Did you see anything?" I nodded slowly. A shape, tall and thin, too thin. And his smile, it didn't move. It stayed frozen, like he knew something we didn't. After that night, things escalated rapidly. Claps echoed throughout the campsite at random intervals, waking us from fitful dreams. Shadows loomed constantly at the edges of our vision, retreating whenever we tried to investigate. One morning, we discovered footprints leading away from the lake, impossibly large and unnatural. And then there was the mirror. On our last day in Willow Creek, I caught sight of someone clapping in the distance, standing atop a hill overlooking the lake. My breath hitched as I squinted through binoculars, hoping to identify who it was. But when I finally focused, I dropped them instantly. Because the person clapping wasn't someone else, it was me. Or at least, it looked like me. Same clothes, same posture, same terrified expression. Except this version of myself wasn't alone. Behind me, or rather, behind the doppelganger stood the clapping man. Tall, impossibly thin, with a smile that stretched wider than any human mouth should. Before I could scream, the figure raised its hand and clapped twice. This time, I didn't answer. Because I knew better. Now, months later, I still hear claps sometimes. Not every day, but often enough to remind me that whatever we unleashed that night isn't done with us yet. And each time, I wonder, did I summon it? Or was it waiting all along? Whoever, whatever it is, it knows me, and it won't stop until it gets what it wants. So please heed my warning. Don't clap back, because once you do, there's no going back.
Next story. The Bridge That Warps Time.
The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves as I stood at the edge of the forest, staring down the narrow dirt road that led to it. It wasn't marked on any map, not even Google Maps, which had become my lifeline during this impromptu road trip through the backwoods of northern Maine. My GPS had been acting up for miles now, its once reliable voice cutting out mid-sentence, replaced by static or silence altogether. I hesitated before stepping forward, glancing over my shoulder at the car parked haphazardly on the side of the road. Its headlights cast long shadows across the underbrush, illuminating nothing but an endless sea of trees. This place felt wrong, like the kind of spot where stories began and ended. But curiosity, that insidious little devil, pushed me forward. And then I saw it. The bridge loomed ahead, skeletal and ancient, spanning a ravine so deep I couldn't see the bottom. It looked like something out of a postcard from another century. Weathered wooden planks creaking beneath moss-covered beams, iron supports rusted nearly beyond recognition. Yet despite its decrepit appearance, there was something unsettling about it, something that made my skin prickle and my breath catch in my throat. It didn't belong here. As I approached, the sound of rushing water below grew louder, though I still couldn't make out the source. Each step closer sent shivers racing up my spine. There were no signs warning travelers away, no caution tape blocking access, just the bridge itself waiting silently for whoever dared cross it. A local legend, perhaps? I thought briefly of asking someone in town earlier, but they all seemed too eager to change the subject whenever I mentioned the area. One man, his face lined with years of hard living, simply stared at me for what felt like an eternity before muttering something about things best left alone. His words echoed in my mind now, chilling in their ambiguity. Still, I kept walking. My phone buzzed in my Pocketa text notification. Pulling it out, I frowned when I saw the message displayed on the screen. Don't go. No sender name, no number. Just those two stark words glowing ominously against the dark background. Before I could process it further, the phone glitched violently, the screen flickering between random photos, videos, and apps until finally going black. Dead. Completely dead. Forcing myself to breathe, I slipped the useless device back into my pocket and took one last look around. The forest seemed quieter now, almost suffocating in its stillness. No birds chirping, no wind rustling the leaves, just the steady hum of unease building in my chest. Then I stepped onto the bridge. At first, everything seemed normal. The planks groaned beneath my weight, tiny splinters digging into the soles of my shoes. The roar of the river, or whatever lay below, was deafening, yet strangely distant, as if muffled by some invisible barrier. I glanced down, expecting to see cracks in the wood or exposed nails, but instead found myself staring at reflections. Not mine, though. They moved independently of me, distorted figures caught mid-motion, some reaching out, others screaming silently, their mouths stretched wide in silent agony. Their eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, unwavering, and then they vanished, swallowed by the darkness below. Time began to shift. I noticed it first when I checked my watch, another futile attempt to regain control. The second hand twitched erratically, stopping and starting in unpredictable bursts. Seconds dragged into minutes. Minutes collapsed into seconds. My heartbeat quickened, matching the erratic rhythm of the clock. Was I imagining it, or was something else at play? Footsteps echoed behind me. Spinning around, I searched the bridge for whoever or whatever was following me, but I was alone. The only sound came from the river far below, its ceaseless flow masking anything else that might be lurking in the shadows. Still, the footsteps persisted, growing louder with each passing moment. They weren't coming from behind anymore, they were ahead. Ahead of me. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized the impossible. The steps were echoing before I moved. By the time I reached the midpoint of the bridge, reality had fractured completely. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light across the landscape, but the temperature plummeted, frost forming instantly on the wooden planks beneath my feet. Night fell abruptly, stars winking into existence above me as though triggered by some cosmic switch. Then dawn broke again, painting the world in hues of pink and orange. All within the span of a single breath. Voices joined the cacophony now, whispers carried on the wind like fragments of forgotten memories. Some called my name, familiar yet distorted, while others spoke in languages I couldn't understand. Among them, one voice stood out, a child's laughter, pure and innocent, followed by a sharp cry of pain. I froze, searching desperately for its source, but the sound faded before I could pinpoint it. And then I heard it again. This time, it was closer. Much closer. When I turned, I wasn't alone anymore. A figure stood at the other end of the bridge, silhouetted against the unnatural glow of the horizon. Tall and gaunt, its features obscured by shadow, it watched me with an intensity that paralyzed me where I stood. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, the distance between us stretching infinitely wider than the physical space allowed. Then it raised a hand, pointing directly at me. Time unraveled. Seconds stretched into hours, days, centuries. My body aged rapidly, wrinkles carving deep lines into my face as gray hairs sprouted overnight. Yet somehow I remained conscious throughout the transformation, trapped in a loop of perpetual decay and renewal. Memories blurred together, overlapping and fracturing until I couldn't tell what was real and what was illusion. Around me, the bridge twisted and contorted, becoming less a structure and more a liminal space, a threshold between worlds. Figures appeared and disappeared without warning, their faces frozen in expressions of terror or grief. Shadows slithered along the ground, writhing like living creatures, while the voices grew louder, drowning out all rational thought. Somewhere amidst the chaos, I stumbled upon a horrifying truth. Time wasn't just warped, it was alive, conscious, sentient, and it wanted me. Or rather, it wanted to keep me. As the realization dawned, the bridge began to collapse around me, wooden planks splintering and falling into the abyss below. Desperation fueled my movements, forcing me to run despite the overwhelming fatigue threatening to consume me. Every step felt heavier than the last, gravity pulling me downward with increasing ferocity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I burst free of the bridge and collapsed onto solid ground. Gasping for air, I rolled onto my back, staring up at the sky. It was night again, the stars twinkling innocently overhead. Everything seemed normal, too normal. That's when I noticed him. Standing a few feet away, watching me with an expression somewhere between pity and amusement, was a younger version of myself. He looked exactly as I had mere moments ago, before the bridge drained decades from my life. Our eyes met, and for a brief instant I saw understanding flash across his face. He knew. Knew what? Before I could ask, he smiled faintly and shook his head, mouthing a single word. Run. I don't remember much after that, only fragments, flashes of light, echoes of screams, the sensation of being pulled in opposite directions. When I finally came to, I was lying in a hospital bed, tubes snaking from my arms, machines beeping softly beside me. A nurse entered the room, her smile warm but strained. "You've been missing for 40 years, she said gently. "Welcome back." 40 years? Impossible. But as I sat up, catching sight of my reflection in the window, I knew she was right. My hair was white, my face lined with age. And yet, inside, I felt unchanged, trapped. Now, every night, I dream of the bridge, of the figure at the other end. Sometimes, when I wake, I swear I can hear footsteps outside my door slow, deliberate, getting closer with each passing day. And sometimes, I wonder if running was the right choice after all.
Next story. Creepy factory ghosts encounter during night shift. Factory ghosts in the dark. I used to think that night shifts were boring.
Lonely? Sure. Quiet? Definitely. But boring. That was the whole appeal. No managers breathing down your neck, no coworkers interrupting your flow, just you, the machines, and time moving slowly. At least, that's what I believed until I took the job at Harlan Steelworks. The factory was built back in the 1940s and had barely been updated since. The entire building groaned like an old man every time the wind hit the walls. Flickering lights, rusted metal, faded safety posters from decades past, everything reeked of age, and something else I couldn't place at first. I was hired through a temp agency. They needed someone to cover the overnight shift after one of the workers abruptly quit. No details were given, just, he left mid-shift and didn't come back. I should have seen that as a red flag. But I needed the money, and the guy on the phone said it was easy work. Just monitor the furnace temperatures. Make sure the conveyors don't jam. Log activity in the binder near the main control panel. That's it. No heavy lifting, no tools, no one to talk to. Easy. My first night started at 10:00 p.m. The factory was about 30 minutes outside town, surrounded by nothing but cornfields and mist. I remember how quiet it was when I pulled into the lot. No other cars. Just mine and the long, low building stretching into the dark like a sleeping beast. I had to buzz myself in. No guard, no receptionist, just a keypad and a red button. Inside, the air was thick with dust and oil. The only light came from a few flickering overheads. The silence was so complete, I could hear the hum of the fluorescents like they were whispering directly in my ears. I found the control panel and checked the binder. The previous shift had signed out at 9:55. No notes, no warnings, just initials, KL. That name would come back to me later, in the worst way. The first 2 hours were uneventful. I made my rounds, logged temps, stretched my legs. The machines weren't running maintenance, apparently so it was just me and the silence. Around midnight, things started to feel wrong. It began with a loud clang from the far end of the conveyor line. I froze. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a creaky pipe. It was deliberate, like someone had kicked a metal drum. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No response. I grabbed the flashlight hanging by the panel and walked toward the noise. The beam cut through the dark like a knife. I passed rows of dormant machinery, their surfaces slick with oil and grime. Everything looked undisturbed. But then, at the end of the corridor, just past the hydraulic press, I saw movement, a figure darting between machines. I nearly dropped the flashlight. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to sound firm. "You're not supposed to be here!" Still nothing. I picked up my pace, turned the corner. No one. But I swear I heard breathing, labored, ragged breathing, right behind me. I turned fast, just empty space. I tried to shake it off, told myself my eyes were playing tricks, maybe a rat, maybe my own reflection. But the dread didn't leave. It clung to me like cold sweat. I returned to the control panel and tried to refocus. Logged another temperature check. But when I glanced at the binder, something had changed. Under the last log entry, someone had written, "You shouldn't be here." I stared at the words, my mouth suddenly dry. I hadn't written that. I was alone. I tore the page out and shoved it in my pocket. Told myself maybe it had been there the whole time, and I just hadn't noticed. But I didn't believe it. Around 2:00 a.m., the intercom crackled to life. A garbled voice said, "Help, down here." My stomach turned. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else in the building. I grabbed the flashlight again, hands shaking. "Who is this?" I asked. "Where are you?" Static. Then again, "Trapped, please." I followed the sound toward the maintenance sub-levelan area I hadn't been told about. The stairs were narrow and slick with moisture. The deeper I went, the colder it got. At the bottom was a long hallway lit by red emergency bulbs. I moved slowly, every step echoing like a gunshot. The voice came again. "Don't leave me here." I turned the corner. The hallway ended at a massive steel door marked Furnace Room B. It was ajar. I pushed it open. The heat hit me like a wave, but the room was empty except for a single charred hard hat resting in the center of the floor. The name etched into it? K.L. The worker who'd left mid-shift. Or, rather, hadn't left at all. I backed out of the room, heart hammering. That's when the door slammed shut behind me. I screamed and banged on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Then the whispers began. At first, it sounded like steam hissing from the pipes. But then I heard words. "We never left." "Join us." "Burned, but not gone." The lights dimmed. Shadows stretched across the walls, writhing like they were alive. I turned in circles, flashlight trembling. And that's when I saw them. Figures emerging from the darkness, half-formed, their bodies blackened and twisted. Faces melted, eyes hollow. They moved slowly, dragging themselves toward me with jerky, unnatural movements. I screamed, ran. I don't remember how I escaped the sublevel. Somehow, I made it back to the control panel. I grabbed my keys, my bag, and bolted out the front door into the rain. When I looked back, the lights in the factory windows were all off, except one, up on the second floor. And in that window, I saw a silhouette watching me. It raised a hand and waved. I quit the next day, didn't ask for my paycheck, didn't tell the agency what happened. A week later, I saw a news article. Temporary worker vanishes during night shift at Harlan Steelworks. A new guy, hired to cover my old spot. They never found him. And the factory? Still operational. Still hiring. But some nights, when I'm driving past those cornfields, I swear I see smoke rising from the roof. And if I roll down the window, I can still hear the whispers. We never left. Do you believe in ghosts now? Because I didn't. Until I met them. Black-eyed kids knocked on my door. Late one evening, around 10:45 p.m., in the quiet town of Eldridge, Ohio, a chilling event unfolded at the home of a woman named Emily Carter. The night was unusually still, with no wind to stir the leaves or rustle through the trees. A thick silence enveloped the area, broken only by the distant hum of an occasional car passing on the highway miles away. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie silver glow over everything it touched. Inside her modest two-story house, Emily sat alone on the couch, engrossed in a book while sipping lukewarm tea. Her dog, Max, a loyal golden retriever, lay sprawled at her feet, his breathing steady and rhythmic. Emily had just turned the page when she heard Ida's soft but distinct knock at the front door. At first, she thought it might be a neighbor stopping by unannounced, though that seemed odd given the late hour. She glanced at the clock again, confirming the time. Who could possibly be visiting now? Setting her book down carefully, she rose from the couch, her heart beginning to beat faster as unease crept into her mind. Max lifted his head, ears perked, sensing something amiss. He let out a low growl, his tail twitching nervously against the carpet. As Emily approached the door, she hesitated, peering cautiously through the peephole. What she saw made her blood run cold. There stood two children, no older than 10 or 11 years old, dressed in dark clothing that seemed far too formal for their age. Their faces were pale, almost ghostly white under the dim porch light. But what truly unnerved Emily were their eyes pitch black, void of any visible iris or pupil, like staring into the depths of endless night. Her breath caught in her throat, and she instinctively stepped back from the door. "Who's there?" she called out shakily, her voice trembling despite her attempts to sound calm. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the doorframe as if seeking some kind of stability. Outside, the children remained eerily silent, their heads tilted slightly to one side as though studying her reaction. It was unsettling, unnatural even. Max began barking loudly now, his protective instincts fully awakened. His frantic noises filled the otherwise silent house, creating a stark contrast to the oppressive stillness outside. "Please," one of the children finally spoke, their voice surprisingly deep and resonant for such young-looking beings. "We need help. Our car broke down nearby and we don't have anywhere else to go tonight." Their tone carried an odd cadence, monotone yet strangely persuasive. Emily felt a strange pull toward opening the door, as if some invisible force urged her to comply. But another part of her screamed louder, warning her not to trust these visitors. "No, I can't," Emily stammered, her resolve strengthening as fear gave way to caution. "I'm sorry, but I cannot open the door. You should call someone who can assist you better." She tried to keep her voice firm, though panic bubbled beneath the surface. The children didn't respond immediately. Instead, they simply stared at her through the glass, their expression unreadable, their black eyes piercing through her soul. Max continued barking furiously, his paws scrabbling against the floor as he paced near the door. Emily backed further away, clutching her chest where her heart pounded wildly. "Go away," she shouted, her voice cracking slightly. "Leave me alone." For a moment, there was silence. Then, without warning, the knocking resumed, this time harder, more insistent. Each blow reverberated through the walls, shaking the very foundation of the house. Emily stumbled backward, nearly tripping over Max, who was now cowering behind her. Tears streamed down her face as sheer terror gripped her body. She grabbed her phone, fumbling with trembling hands to dial 911. "Hello? Yes, this is Emily Carter speaking. I live at 42 Maple Street in Eldridge. Please send someone quickly. I think something dangerous is outside my house." Her voice cracked again as she struggled to explain the situation. The dispatcher assured her help was on the way, but instructed her to stay calm and avoid opening the door under any circumstances. Minutes passed like hours as Emily waited anxiously, every nerve in her body on high alert. The knocking persisted, growing louder and more relentless with each passing second. At one point, it stopped altogether, leaving an unsettling silence that was somehow worse than the noise itself. Emily wondered if they had gone or if they were merely waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Finally, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer until their sound echoed directly outside her house. Relief washed over Emily as she watched red and blue lights flash across her windows. Officers arrived swiftly, their boots thudding heavily on her porch. When they opened the door, Emily collapsed into their arms, sobbing uncontrollably. They promised to investigate thoroughly, but when they stepped outside, there was no sign of the mysterious children. No footprints, no evidence of a vehicle breakdown, nothing to indicate anyone had been there at all. In the days that followed, Emily couldn't shake the memory of those haunting black eyes. She read stories online about similar encounters, people claiming to have met so-called black-eyed kids who appeared during the night asking for entry into homes or vehicles. Some dismissed them as urban legends, while others swore they were supernatural entities preying on human vulnerability. Whatever they were, Emily knew one thing for certain: she would never answer the door after dark again. The experience left an indelible mark on her psyche, a constant reminder of the unseen dangers lurking beyond the safety of her own four walls. Even months later, whenever she heard a knock at the door, her pulse quickened and her mind replayed that terrifying night in vivid detail. And though she told herself repeatedly that it was over, deep down, she couldn't help but wonder if the black-eyed children were still out there watching, waiting, searching for their next victim. Don't just watch in the dark. Click subscribe, like, and join now. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The whisper that breathed. A summer storm brewed over Boston, its dark clouds casting long shadows across the narrow streets of Beacon Hill. The air was thick with humidity, and the faint scent of rain mingled with the salty breeze from the nearby harbor. At precisely 5 in the afternoon, when the sun should have still been high, an unnatural twilight descended upon the city. Andrew Scott hurried down Pinckney Street, his leather satchel slapping against his side with each quickened step. The first rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, vibrating through the cobblestones beneath his worn loafers. He had taken this route home 1,000 times before, but today something felt different. The usual sounds of the neighborhood, children playing, dogs barking, the occasional car engine, were strangely muted. Only the wind seemed alive, whispering through the ancient trees that lined the street, whispering in a way that made Andrew's skin prickle. He glanced at the old Victorian house at number 17, its windows dark and unwelcoming despite the early hour. The for sale sign in the yard swayed gently, though he couldn't feel any breeze on his face. Madison Rivera stood at her kitchen window on Mount Vernon Street, staring out at the gathering storm. Her teacup trembled slightly in her hand as she watched the clouds churn above the gold dome of the State House. She had lived in this neighborhood her entire life, but never had she seen such an ominous sky this early in the evening. The antique clock on her wall ticked loudly in the silence, each second stretching longer than it should. Something about the atmosphere felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. In the South End, James Cooper sat alone in his apartment on Tremont Street, absently flipping through old photographs. The lightning flashed outside, illuminating his collection of vintage cameras displayed on the shelves. His fingers paused on a particular picture, a group of friends gathered at Boston Common, smiling faces frozen in time. But as another bolt of lightning illuminated the room, he could have sworn one of the faces in the photograph moved, just for a moment. Just enough to make his heart skip a beat. The frame fell from his hands, shattering on the hardwood floor. Andrew found himself drawn to the old cemetery at the top of Copp's Hill. The wrought iron gates creaked open before him, though he was certain he hadn't touched them. The gravestones stood like silent sentinels, their weathered inscriptions barely visible in the dim light. As he walked between the rows, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They weren't words exactly, more like fragments of memories or thoughts that didn't belong to him. A cold droplet of rain hit his cheek, followed by another. The storm was getting closer, the thunder growing more insistent, yet he couldn't bring himself to leave. Madison's phone rang suddenly, making her jump. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no response, only the sound of breathing, slow, deliberate, measured breaths that seemed to echo in her ear. The connection remained open, the breathing continuing without variation. She wanted to hang up, but her fingers wouldn't move. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending a chill through the room despite the summer heat. James had gathered the broken pieces of the photograph frame and was attempting to reconstruct it when he noticed something odd. The image inside had changed. Where once there had been 6 smiling faces, now there were 7. The new face wasn't clear, just a blur of features that seemed to shift when he tried to focus on them. The room temperature dropped suddenly, and his breath came out in visible puffs. From somewhere deep within the walls, he heard a soft scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across wood, getting closer with each passing moment. The rain began to fall in earnest now, drumming against rooftops and streaming down window panes throughout the city. Andrew found himself standing before a particular gravestone, its inscription worn almost smooth by time. Yet he could read it perfectly in his mind. Elizabeth Hargrove, 1865. The name triggered something in his memory, though he couldn't place why. The whispers around him formed words now, disjointed phrases that painted pictures of a life cut tragically short. Never meant to. Kept calling me back. So cold here. Madison finally managed to end the call, dropping the phone on the counter with shaking hands. The lights flickered, then steadied, then flickered again. She moved to check the circuit breaker, but stopped when she saw her reflection in the hallway mirror. It wasn't quite right, her eyes were wrong, too dark, too empty. She blinked, and the reflection smiled while she remained expressionless. The breathing from the phone call continued behind her, though no device was near. You shouldn't have answered, it seemed to say, so softly she might have imagined it. James had barricaded himself in his bedroom, the photograph hidden safely in a drawer. The scraping had stopped, replaced by a gentle tapping at his window. When he looked, there was nothing there except the distorted reflection of his room. But something about the angles was off, as if space itself had bent slightly out of shape. His cameras, usually arranged with precise care, were now facing inward, their lenses trained on his bed. "They see you," he whispered to himself, though he wasn't sure where the words came from. The storm outside reached its peak, lightning flashing continuously, yet the darkness in his room deepened rather than lifted. The three of them, Andrew, Madison, James, were connected by threads they couldn't see, drawn together by forces beyond their understanding. Each had experienced strange occurrences before, dismissing them as coincidence or imagination. But now, as the storm battered Boston and the boundaries between worlds grew thin, they would be forced to confront the truth. Elizabeth Hargrove's story wasn't finished, and somehow they had become part of its conclusion. Andrew traced his fingers along the edge of the gravestone, feeling the rough stone bite into his skin. The pain was real, grounding him when everything else felt surreal. The whispers told him things, terrible things, about what had happened here all those years ago. A forbidden love, a desperate plea, a final betrayal. The rain soaked through his clothes, but he barely noticed. In his mind's eye, he could see her, Elizabeth, young and beautiful, standing at the edge of the hill, looking out toward the harbor. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear over the storm. But he could feel them, resonating in his chest like a second heartbeat. Madison had retreated to her basement, seeking sanctuary from whatever haunted her home. The old furnace hummed in the corner, its rhythm matching the breathing that now filled every room. Boxes stacked against the walls contained fragments of her family's history, generations of Riveras who had lived and died in this very house. She opened one at random, finding a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local Girl's Mysterious Death Shocks Community." The date was June 12, 1865. The photograph showed a girl who looked remarkably like her, standing beside a man whose face was obscured by shadow. He promised, the breathing seemed to say. But he lied. James discovered something in his closet, a small wooden box he didn't remember owning. Inside were letters, written in elegant script that faded even as he read them. They spoke of longing and loss, of meetings in secret places, of promises broken under duress. The last letter ended abruptly. "If you're reading this, then I have failed. Tell them what he did, tell them how he silenced me, the whispers will guide you." The room temperature plummeted, frost forming on the inside of his window. Outside, something moved between the flashes of lightning, something that shouldn't exist in this world. Find them. It breathed. All of you. The storm reached its crescendo, lightning striking the gold dome of the State House with a deafening crack. For a moment, everything went white, and when vision returned, the city seemed subtly altered. Shadows fell differently, familiar landmarks appeared slightly skewed, people walking in the streets moved as if underwater, their faces blank masks. Those who had been touched by Elizabeth's story felt the change most acutely. Their senses heightened, their perceptions expanded beyond normal limits. Sounds carried from impossible distances. Smells lingered long after their sources disappeared. Touches left imprints that glowed faintly in the dark. Andrew found himself unable to leave the cemetery. The gates had vanished, replaced by an endless expanse of tombstones stretching in all directions. Each bore Elizabeth's name, each marked a different year of death. The whispers became a chorus now, overlapping voices telling conflicting versions of the same tragedy. Some claimed she had thrown herself from the hill in despair, others insisted she had been pushed. All agreed on one thing: justice had never been served. The rain continued to fall, but it wasn't water anymore, it was memories, each drop carrying fragments of lives cut short, hopes dashed, loves lost. Madison's basement had transformed into a labyrinth of family secrets. Every box she opened contained evidence of her ancestors' involvement in Elizabeth's fate: letters of condemnation, witness statements, a blood-stained handkerchief, photographs showing the same shadowy figure across generations, always present at moments of tragedy. The breathing grew louder, surrounding her like a physical presence. "You know him," it rasped. "He watches still." She looked up to see her own reflection in the basement window, but instead of her face, she saw the Shadow Man's features clearly for the first time. Their eyes met, and she understood everything that had been hidden, everything that had been denied. James's apartment building had emptied of all other tenants, leaving him alone with the entity that had been watching him through his cameras. The photographs on his walls had changed. Each now showed the same scene: Elizabeth standing at the edge of Copp's Hill, reaching out to someone just out of frame. The seventh figure in his broken photograph had clarified, revealing features that matched the Shadow Man from Madison's past. The wooden box had multiplied, filling his living room with identical copies, each containing variations of the same tragic story. "We are witnesses," the voice whispered directly into his mind, "and we are judged." As the supernatural storm raged, drawing energy from centuries of buried guilt and unresolved grief, the three found themselves converging at number 17 Pinckney Street. The house that had seemed merely old and empty now pulsed with malevolent life. Its windows reflected scenes from the past. Elizabeth's final moments played out endlessly, each iteration slightly different, each ending the same. The front door stood open, inviting them inside to witness the truth. The interior defied physics. Rooms stretched impossibly far, staircases led to nowhere, doors opened onto other dimensions. In the center of it all stood the Shadow Man, finally revealed in full. His face was a composite of every person who had ever turned a blind eye to injustice, every authority figure who had dismissed Elizabeth's pleas for help. "It's time," he said, his voice a chorus of thousands. Time to break the cycle. The house shook violently as reality struggled to contain the weight of so many unresolved wrongs. Andrew, Madison, and James realized simultaneously that they had been chosen not as victims, but as instruments of resolution. Each carried a piece of Elizabeth's story within them: Andrew through his ancestral connection to the hill, Madison through her family's complicity in the cover-up, James through his ability to capture truth in images. Together, they formed a conduit through which Elizabeth's voice could finally be heard, her story told in full, her justice served. The Shadow Man began to dissolve, his form unraveling like smoke caught in a strong wind. "Too late," he whispered, fragments of his essence dispersing into the ether. "The truth cannot be contained." The house around them started to collapse, folding in on itself as centuries of lies unraveled. Through the destruction, Elizabeth emerged, not as a ghost, but as a manifestation of collective memory given form. Her eyes held all the sorrow of her age, yet also a spark of hope newly kindled. The storm broke as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind an eerie calm. Number 17 Pinckney Street stood intact once more, its windows dark and its for sale sign swaying gently in the evening breeze. Andrew, Madison, and James found themselves standing on the sidewalk, drenched and disoriented but whole. The whispers had ceased, replaced by the natural sounds of a city recovering from a summer storm. Lightning flashed one last time, illuminating the hilltop where Elizabeth had stood so long ago. For a brief moment, they thought they saw her silhouette against the darkening sky, her hand raised in farewell. Life in Boston returned to normal, though those who had been touched by the supernatural events carried their experiences like scars, invisible to others, but ever present in their minds. Andrew devoted himself to preserving local history, ensuring that stories like Elizabeth's would never be forgotten again. Madison worked to uncover other buried truths in her family's past, determined to break cycles of silence and denial. James continued taking photographs, but now his lens sought to capture not just images, but essences, the intangible elements that made people who they were. On quiet summer evenings, when storms gathered over the city and the wind whispered through the ancient trees, some claimed they could still hear Elizabeth's voice. Not demanding vengeance, not seeking pity, simply reminding those who would listen that truth has a way of emerging, no matter how deeply it is buried. And sometimes, when passing number 17 Pinckney Street, particularly sensitive souls might catch a glimpse of movement in an upper window or feel a gentle touch on their shoulder, accompanied by the softest of whispers, "Thank you." The story of Elizabeth Hargrove became legend in certain circles, a cautionary tale about the dangers of ignoring injustice and the power of collective memory. Her name appeared in historical records, her story told in museums and walking tours. Yet those who had truly known her, Andrew, Madison, James, understood that her presence lingered not in these official accounts, but in the spaces between them. In the moments when the world seemed to hold its breath, when shadows fell just a little too deep, when the wind carried voices from another time, Boston continued its march forward, oblivious to the thin veil separating past from present. Summer storms still rolled in from the Atlantic, lightning still illuminated the gold dome of the State House. Children still played in the shadow of Copp's Hill, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded there so long ago. But somewhere, in the fabric of the city itself, Elizabeth's story continued to resonate. A reminder that some truths refuse to be silenced. Some voices continue to breathe long after their bodies have turned to dust. And on nights when the moon hung low over Beacon Hill, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets, those who listened closely might hear it, the whisper that breathed, carrying fragments of a life reclaimed, echoes of justice finally served. Reminders that even in death, truth finds a way to speak through those willing to listen. Next story. The unsolved case of room 606, the hotel room that never existed. I never thought I'd be sitting here telling you this story. It's not something anyone would believe if they hadn't experienced it themselves. But the truth is, some things in life are too strange to ignore, and room 606 was one of them. Let me start from the beginning. It all began with a phone call late one night, a voice on the other end that sounded like someone trying desperately to warn me about something I couldn't yet understand. "Don't go there," it whispered before disconnecting abruptly. At first, I dismissed it as a prank or just another sleepless night getting the better of me. But then the emails started coming. Anonymous messages filled with cryptic warnings. Room 606 doesn't exist, but it will find you. The more I tried to ignore them, the louder they became. And eventually, curiosity got the better of me. You see, I'm a journalist by trade, and stories like these are my bread and butter. Urban legends, unsolved mysteries, they're what keep me up at night, both figuratively and literally. So, when I stumbled across an article online about a hotel called the Grand Elysian, nestled deep in the heart of a small town no one had ever heard of, I knew I had to investigate further. According to local lore, the Grand Elysian wasn't just any ordinary hotel, it was infamous for its mysterious past. Guests reported hearing whispers through the walls, feeling cold spots where none should exist, and even seeing shadows moving in places they shouldn't. But what intrigued me most was the legend surrounding room 606. Some said it didn't exist at all, that it had been sealed off decades ago after a series of disappearances left investigators baffled. Others claimed it still existed, hidden away behind locked doors, waiting for those foolish enough to seek it out. And so, armed with nothing but my notebook, a flashlight, and a healthy dose of skepticism, I booked myself a room at the Grand Elysian. Little did I know how much that decision would change my life forever. When I arrived, the hotel looked every bit as eerie as the stories suggested. Its towering facade loomed over the street, its windows dark, except for a few scattered lights flickering faintly in the distance. The air smelled faintly of mildew and old wood, and the heavy oak doors creaked ominously as I pushed them open. A bell rang somewhere inside, echoing down the long corridors beyond. At the front desk sat an elderly man whose eyes seemed to pierce right through me. He introduced himself simply as Mr. Grayson, though his name tag bore no such title. His fingers trembled slightly as he handed me my keycard, and his voice carried a weight that made me feel uneasy. "You're staying in room 412, he said without looking up. "Fourth floor. Elevators around the corner." I nodded, thanking him politely, though his demeanor left me unsettled. As I turned to leave, I noticed a peculiar gap between two panels on the wall behind him. For a moment, I thought I saw a movementous shadow darting into the darkness, but when I blinked, it was gone. The elevator ride up felt longer than it should have. Each ding announcing our arrival at a new floor sent shivers down my spine. By the time I reached the fourth floor, the hallway stretched out before me like a labyrinth, its carpet worn thin and stained in places. The lighting flickered erratically, casting odd shapes against the peeling wallpaper. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear faint footsteps, though I was clearly alone. My room was exactly as described. Sparse furnishings, outdated decor, and a window offering a view of nothing but brick walls. Yet despite its unremarkable appearance, something about the space made me uncomfortable. The silence pressed heavily on my ears, and I swore I could feel eyes watching me from outside. That evening, I decided to explore the hotel further. After all, I hadn't come here just to sit in my room. Armed with my notebook, I wandered aimlessly through the corridors, taking note of their peculiarities. Hallways twisted and turned in ways that defied logic, leading me back to places I'd already been. Doors appeared where none had existed moments before, only to vanish again once I approached. It was maddening and utterly fascinating. Then came the whispers. At first, I thought they were coming from within my own mind, echoes of paranoia brought on by the oppressive atmosphere. But soon, I realized they weren't imagined. They were real soft murmurs drifting through the vents, voices speaking languages I couldn't recognize. My heart raced as I followed the sound, drawn deeper into the bowels of the building. And then, I found it. Room 606. The door stood at the end of a particularly narrow corridor, its number etched into the metal frame in faded gold letters. It looked out of place among the other rooms, almost as though it didn't belong. Yet there it was, staring back at me like a silent sentinel guarding secrets best left buried. For a moment, I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to walk away while I still could. But curiosity, or perhaps fate, compelled me forward. With trembling hands, I reached for the doorknob, turning it slowly. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed unnaturally loud in the empty hall. Inside, the world shifted. Room 606 defied explanation. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as though alive. Shadows danced across the floor in patterns that made no sense, and the furniture appeared to rearrange itself whenever I glanced away. Objects from different eras cluttered the space: a rotary phone sitting next to a modern laptop, antique vases standing beside plastic cups. Time itself felt distorted here, stretching and compressing until I couldn't tell whether minutes or hours had passed. But worst of all were the faces. In the mirrors lining the walls, reflections stared back at men of my own, but those of strangers, men, women, children, all frozen in expressions of terror. Their lips moved silently, forming words I couldn't quite catch. And then, slowly, they began to speak. "Help us." Their voices overlapped, creating a cacophony of pleas and warnings. My head throbbed painfully as I backed away, desperate to escape. But the door was gone. Where it had once stood now lay only a blank wall, smooth and impenetrable. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. Hours or maybe days passed in that room, or perhaps no time at all. I lost count, unable to distinguish reality from nightmare. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they consumed everything. Memories surfaced unbidden, scenes from my past replaying endlessly in vivid detail, each recollection cut deeper than the last, unraveling threads of guilt and regret I thought long buried. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. The room dissolved around me, replaced by the familiar sight of the hotel hallway. The door to room 606 hung open, though I couldn't recall leaving. Shaking uncontrollably, I stumbled back to my own room, collapsing onto the bed as tears streamed down my face. Days later, I returned home, determined to put the ordeal behind me, but the memories lingered, haunting me in ways I couldn't explain. When I tried to recount my experience to others, they dismissed it as nonsense. No one believed Minot, even myself sometimes. Records showed no mention of room 606. Employees denied its existence entirely. Yet deep down, I knew it was real. Because every night, as I lie awake in the dark, I can still hear the whispers calling my name. And sometimes, when I least expect it, I swear I see the number 606 carved into the walls of my own apartment. Don't just watch in the dark. Click subscribe, like, and join now. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The customer who never left the store. The cicadas were louder than usual that summer night in Charleston, their rhythmic buzzing weaving through the thick humidity that clung to every surface. Lucas Allen stood behind the counter of his small convenience store on King Street, absently wiping down the already spotless glass display case. The neon open sign flickered slightly in the window, casting an uneven glow across the rows of snacks and beverages lining the aisles. It was nearly midnight, and the usual Friday crowd had already come and gone, leaving only the persistent hum of the refrigerators and the distant sound of traffic from the historic district. Lucas checked his phone for what felt like the 100th time that evening. No new messages, just another quiet night in a city that never truly slept. He sighed and glanced at the security camera monitors mounted above the cigarette rack. Each screen showed a different angle of the store's interior. all empty except for his own reflection in the convex lenses. Something about tonight felt different though, like the air itself was heavier than normal. His eyes lingered on the darkest corners of the footage before moving back to the register. The bell above the door jingled softly, making Lucas look up with automatic politeness. A woman stepped inside, her presence immediately altering the atmosphere of the shop. She wore a long coat that seemed inappropriate for the sweltering July heat, its dark fabric hanging loosely around her thin frame. Her face was partially obscured by stringy blonde hair that caught the fluorescent light in strange ways, as if it didn't quite belong there. Lucas noticed how her shoes made no sound against the tiled floor. "Can I help you find something?" he asked, his voice carrying just a touch of professional warmth. The woman didn't respond right away. Instead, she moved slowly toward the back of the store, her head tilted at an unnatural angle as she examined the shelves. Lucas watched her reflection in the glass refrigerator doors. Something about her movements seemed off, almost mechanical. Charlotte Robinson pushed her cart down aisle 3, debating between chips and pretzels. She paused when she realized the woman in the dark coat hadn't moved from where she'd been standing for the past 10 minutes. The stranger was now facing the wall, one hand resting on the metal shelving unit. Charlotte cleared her throat softly as she passed, but the woman didn't acknowledge her presence. There was something unsettling about the way her fingers curled around the edge of the shelf, knuckles white against the dull metal. Lucas finished counting the drawer for the third time, the numbers blurring together in his mind. The woman still hadn't approached the register. He could see her in his peripheral vision, standing in the same spot near the snack aisle. Occasionally, he'd hear the soft rustle of her coat, though he couldn't be sure if she was actually moving anything from the shelves. The store's lights seemed dimmer than usual, casting long shadows across the floor. When he looked directly at her, she appeared perfectly normal, just another customer browsing late at night. But whenever his attention shifted elsewhere, he could feel her watching him. Amelia Mitchell entered the store 20 minutes later, her nurse's scrubs still damp from walking through the humid night air. She needed headache medicine after her double shift at Roper Street Francis Hospital. The first thing she noticed was the temperature. It felt several degrees colder inside than it should have been. Then she saw the woman in the dark coat standing near the beverage coolers. Something about her posture seemed wrong, like she was leaning into the glass without actually touching it. Amelia grabbed her medicine quickly, avoiding eye contact as she approached the register. The transaction took longer than necessary. Lucas kept glancing at the security monitors, noting how the woman's position never changed despite the passage of time. On the cameras, she appeared as a dark smudge against the bright colors of the snack aisle, her features indistinct even in high definition. When he finally looked up from the register, Amelia was already gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of hospital-grade soap. The cicadas outside seemed louder now, their song almost frantic against the glass windows. Charlotte decided she needed to leave. The woman had started humming softly, a tune that sent shivers down her spine, though she couldn't place why. As she approached the register, she noticed something peculiar. The floor tiles beneath the woman's feet looked newer than the rest, as if they'd been recently replaced. The grout lines were cleaner, the pattern slightly misaligned with the surrounding area. Lucas rang up her purchase without speaking, his hands trembling slightly as he handled the cash. Neither of them acknowledged the figure still standing silently among the snacks. The clock ticked past midnight. Lucas began his closing routine, straightening displays and checking expiration dates. The woman remained in her spot, seemingly unaware of the store's operating hours. When he finally mustered the courage to approach her, she turned toward him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be leaving soon," she said, her voice carrying an odd echo despite the carpeted floor. Lucas nodded and returned to the register, though his heart pounded in his chest. Something about her statement felt more like a warning than an assurance. Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that she'd seen the woman before. During her walk home, fragments of memory surfaced, a patient years ago who had died in room 312, her body found cold and alone after the night staff failed to check on her. The details matched too perfectly. The dark coat, the stringy blonde hair, the way she stood so still, it was easy to forget she was there. Amelia quickened her pace, the streetlights casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her from every direction. Back at the store, Lucas prepared to lock up. The woman was still there, now examining the lottery tickets with unnatural focus. Her reflection in the glass case showed details that shouldn't have been possible, her eyes too large, her mouth moving, though no sound emerged. When Lucas announced the store was closing, she simply nodded and walked toward the back exit. The security cameras captured her movements perfectly until she reached the threshold, then suddenly she vanished from all screens simultaneously. Charlotte lay awake in her apartment on Queen Street, unable to stop thinking about the encounter. The humming had lodged itself in her mind, repeating endlessly like a broken record. She pulled out her phone and searched recent news articles, finding nothing unusual about the convenience store or its employees. Yet when she scrolled through the business's social media page, she noticed something strange. In every photo taken inside the shop, the same dark figure appeared in the background, always partially obscured, but unmistakably present. Lucas locked the front door and set the alarm, his hands shaking as he worked. The back exit showed no signs of forced entry or recent use. The woman's absence felt heavier than her presence had been. As he walked to his car, he couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. The parking lot lights buzzed faintly overhead, attracting clouds of insects that cast dancing shadows across the asphalt. When he glanced back at the store windows, he saw her standing exactly where he'd left her, staring out with an expression he couldn't read. Amelia called in sick the next day, unable to face the memories flooding back with each passing hour. She researched the store's history, discovering it had been built on the site of an old boarding house that burned down decades ago. Records mentioned a woman who had disappeared during the fire, her body never found among the charred remains. The description matched the figure from the store perfectly, right down to the humming that witnesses claimed they could still hear on quiet nights. The following evening, Lucas arrived for his shift to find everything exactly as he'd left it. The security footage showed 14 hours of empty aisles and silent registers. Yet, when he reviewed the previous night's recording, there she was again, appearing in the snack aisle as if she'd never left, moving with purpose toward the back of the store. The timestamp confirmed she'd been there the entire time, invisible to everyone except through the unblinking eyes of the cameras. Charlotte couldn't stay away. Something compelled her to return to the store, to confront the mystery that had taken root in her thoughts. When she entered that night, the air felt colder than before, and the humming was louder, vibrating through her bones like a tuning fork. The woman stood in the same spot, surrounded by products that seemed to decay faster than they should. Their expiration dates read months in the future, yet their packaging was faded and brittle, as if time itself bent around her presence. Lucas began documenting everything. He kept detailed notes about each encounter, noting patterns in her behavior and appearance. The woman never spoke unless directly addressed, and even then, her responses were cryptic and often nonsensical. Yet, she seemed to know intimate details about each person who interacted with her, childhood memories Charlotte had forgotten, medical cases Amelia thought she'd kept confidential, personal struggles Lucas had never shared with anyone. The knowledge hung in the air like a threat, preventing them from seeking help. The city continued its usual rhythm around them, oblivious to the supernatural phenomenon unfolding on King Street. Tourists snapped photos of the historic district, capturing streaks of darkness in their pictures that they dismissed as lens flares. Locals complained about power fluctuations in the area, their clocks running minutes fast or slow without explanation. The cicadas grew louder with each passing night, their song taking on an almost musical quality that matched the woman's haunting melody. Amelia discovered other victims during her research, people who had encountered similar figures in different locations throughout Charleston's history. Each story followed the same pattern. A mysterious woman appearing in places of commerce, lingering beyond reason, collecting pieces of people's lives until they became trapped in her orbit. Some claimed she was searching for something specific, others believed she fed on human connection. All agreed that once she marked you, there was no escaping her influence. Lucas found himself changing. His reflection in the store windows seemed less substantial, his features fading slightly each day. Customers commented on how tired he looked, though he slept better than he had in years. The security cameras captured moments when he wasn't entirely present, his form flickering like static between frames. The woman watched these transformations with apparent satisfaction, her humming growing more complex, as if composing a symphony only she could hear. Charlotte's friends noticed her withdrawal from social activities. She spent hours sitting in her apartment, staring at the convenience store's security feed she'd hacked into. The woman's movements created patterns that resembled ancient symbols when traced over time. Mathematical equations formed in the spaces between appearances, suggesting a logic behind the madness. Yet each revelation came at a cost, fragments of Charlotte's personality chipped away, replaced by an understanding she couldn't articulate. The temperature in the store dropped steadily, creating condensation on the windows that spelled out words when viewed from certain angles. "Help me" appeared repeatedly, though none of them could determine if it was a plea or a command. The refrigeration units malfunctioned constantly, their contents freezing solid regardless of settings. Products aged rapidly on the shelves, some turning to dust within hours of stocking. Time itself seemed to warp around the woman, bending reality to accommodate her presence. Amelia's dreams became vivid and disturbing. She found herself wandering through endless aisles of forgotten stores, each one containing the same dark figure waiting patiently. The humming followed her into consciousness, becoming a constant companion that drowned out other sounds. Her colleagues at the hospital remarked on her improved intuition regarding patient care, though they couldn't explain how she knew things she shouldn't. The line between her world and the woman's realm blurred until she couldn't tell which side she belonged to. Lucas attempted to break the cycle by staying away from the store. For 3 days, he avoided King Street entirely, hoping distance would sever the connection. Instead, the woman's influence grew stronger. She appeared in his apartment mirror, reflected in puddles during rainstorms, visible in the steam rising from his morning coffee. The humming never ceased, matching his heartbeat until he couldn't distinguish between internal and external sounds. His attempts to warn others fell on deaf ears, their faces blank as if seeing through him. Charlotte documented everything obsessively, filling notebooks with observations and calculations. The patterns revealed themselves gradually, forming a complex web of connections between victims across generations. Each person had experienced loss or isolation significant enough to create a void the woman could fill. They had sought comfort in material possessions, believing wealth or convenience could replace human connection. The realization hit her like a physical blow. They were all customers who had never truly left the store, trapped by their own desires. The final confrontation occurred on the hottest night of the summer. The cicadas screamed in harmony with the humming, their combined song shaking the glass in the store's windows. Lucas, Charlotte, and Amelia found themselves drawn back to the convenience store despite their efforts to resist. The woman waited for them in aisle 3, her dark coat billowing as if caught in a wind that didn't exist. Her smile revealed too many teeth, each one gleaming like polished stone. "You've learned," she said, her voice resonating through the empty store. But learning isn't enough. The floor tiles beneath them shifted, revealing the foundation of the old boarding house. Charred wood and ash filled the space where modern construction should have been. The security cameras captured everything perfectly, broadcasting their final moments to empty monitors throughout the building. One by one, they stepped forward, unable to resist the pull any longer. The store remained open for business the next day. New employees arrived, unaware of the previous staff. Customers browsed the aisles, selecting items they didn't need but couldn't refuse. In the security footage, dark figures moved among the shelves, their forms becoming clearer with each passing night. The humming continued, growing louder with each new victim drawn into its melody. And in aisle 3, the woman waited patiently, collecting souls who had forgotten what it meant to truly leave. Hookman left his claw behind. It was a chilly autumn evening in the small town of Willow Creek, where the air carried the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. The clock struck 9:45 p.m. as Emily Carter sat nervously in her car, parked near the edge of a darkened forest at the end of Maple Lane. Beside her sat her boyfriend, Mark Thompson, his arm resting casually on the back of the seat as he tried to reassure her with light conversation. The forest loomed ominously ahead, its towering trees casting long shadows across the road, even under the pale glow of the moon. Neither spoke of the reason they were there, the infamous legend of the Hookman. The story had been whispered among their friends for years, passed down like an urban myth meant to scare teenagers into behaving themselves. According to local lore, the Hookman was a disfigured killer who roamed the woods at night searching for unsuspecting victims. His weapon of choice? A jagged, claw-like hook that replaced one of his handsaw, gruesome reminder of his violent past. Some claimed he had died decades ago, while others swore he still stalked the area, drawn by the fear of those who dared visit his domain after dark. Tonight, Emily and Mark found themselves testing the truth behind those tales. As they sat in silence, the forest grew eerily quiet, the usual sounds of wildlife replaced by an unsettling stillness. A sudden gust of wind rattled the car windows, making Emily jump. "Do you think it's true?" she asked softly, her voice trembling slightly despite her attempts to sound brave. Mark chuckled nervously, though his grip on the steering wheel tightened involuntarily. "Of course not," he replied, forcing a reassuring smile. "It's just a story." But then came the sound of faint scratching noise against the roof of the car, followed by a soft thud as if something heavy had landed nearby. Both froze, their hearts pounding wildly in unison. "What was that?" Emily whispered, her eyes darting toward the rearview mirror. Outside, the forest remained silent, its shadows unmoving, yet somehow more menacing now. Mark turned the key in the ignition, preparing to drive away, but the car engine refused to start. Panic surged through them as they realized they were trapped. From somewhere beyond the tree line emerged a figure tall, gaunt, and cloaked in darkness. Its face was obscured by shadow, but its presence radiated an undeniable menace. In one hand, it held what appeared unmistakably to be a hooked blade, glinting faintly in the moonlight. Emily screamed, throwing herself against the passenger door as the figure approached slowly, deliberately. Each step echoed through the night, amplifying their terror until it felt almost unbearable. "Stay calm," Mark urged, though his own voice betrayed his fear. He fumbled with the keys, praying the engine would cooperate, but nothing happened. The figure reached the car window now, its claw scraping lightly against the glass. Inside, Emily sobbed uncontrollably, clutching her purse tightly as if it might protect her from whatever horror awaited outside. Mark grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment, shining it directly at the figure in hopes of driving it back. But instead of retreating, the creature tilted its head slightly, studying them with unnatural curiosity. Then, without warning, it vanished, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. Emily and Mark sat frozen for several moments, unsure whether to believe their eyes. Finally, the car engine roared to life and they sped away from the forest as fast as possible. Behind them, the Hookman's laughter echoed through the night, chilling them to the bone. Back at Emily's house, they collapsed onto the couch, breathing heavily as adrenaline coursed through their veins. Their relief was short-lived, however, when Emily noticed something peculiar inside her Percy single, rust-stained claw resting among her belongings. Her breath caught in her throat as sheer terror gripped her body once again. "He left it behind," she stammered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own pulse pounding in her ears. Mark examined the object closely, his fingers trembling slightly as he touched it. It was unmistakably Riala, grotesque relic of the Hookman's existence. Yet, how had it gotten there? Neither could remember opening their bags during the encounter, nor did they recall seeing him drop anything before disappearing. The implications were terrifying. They weren't merely being watched, they were being toyed with. Over the following days, strange occurrences plagued Emily and Mark's lives. Shadows moved unnaturally in the corners of their vision, whispers filled the air even when no one else was present, and occasionally, They heard the faint scratching sound that reminded them all too vividly of that fateful night. Sleep became impossible, their minds replaying every detail of the encounter in endless loops. Desperate for answers, they consulted local historians and paranormal investigators, learning about similar cases involving the Hookman. Some claimed he acted out of vengeance, seeking retribution against those who mocked his deformity. Others believed he was bound to the forest, unable to leave its confines unless invited willingly by prey. Eventually, the strain became too much to bear. With nowhere else to turn, Emily and Mark sought refuge in separate cities, hoping distance might sever their connection to the entity haunting them. For a time, peace returned to their lives. They rebuilt routines, finding comfort in the familiarity of new surroundings. Yet, every now and then, during quiet nights when the world seemed most still, Emily swore she heard it again, that same scratching sound creeping closer, accompanied by faint giggles that sounded both childlike and menacing at the same time. Years later, neither speaks of their ordeal openly. Though grateful for their escape, they can't shake the feeling that the forest and its enigmatic inhabitant hasn't truly let go. Somewhere, deep within the woods surrounding Willow Creek, the Hookman still waits watching, waiting, ready to claim his next victim.
Next story. Time didn't exist here, but I was still awake. Hello? Can anyone hear me? My name is Alex. This isn't going to make much sense at first, but I need to tell someone what happened, what's still happening. Because if you're listening to this right now, then it might already be too late. It started with a walk, just a simple hike through the woods behind my house. You know how it goes, you take a shortcut home after work, or maybe you're trying to clear your head after a long day. That's all it was supposed to be, a quiet escape from reality. But something about that forest felt different today. Wrong, almost. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't moved in years. The trees stood unnaturally still, their branches twisted into shapes that looked more like claws than growth patterns, and there were no birds. No insects buzzing around me, just silence. Thick, heavy silence. I should have turned back when I noticed the first sign, but who could have guessed? Let me rewind for a moment and explain exactly where everything went sideways. So here's the thing about forests, they all look the same at first glance. Tall trunks, dense canopies, patches of sunlight filtering down through gaps above. It's easy to think you're heading somewhere familiar until you realize you're not. I stumbled upon a trail I'd never seen before, or at least I don't remember seeing it. It wasn't marked on any maps I'd ever studied, and yet there it was, a narrow dirt path winding deeper into the woods, lined with moss-covered stones. My curiosity got the better of me, as it always does. Before I knew it, I was following the trail farther and farther away from civilization. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The sun cast golden beams across the forest floor, dappling the ground with light. Birds chirped softly in the distance. Everything appeared normal, almost peaceful. But then, things began to shift. The light stopped moving. Wait. Let me clarify, that doesn't mean the forest grew darker. Quite the opposite, actually. The sunlight stayed fixed in place, hovering over the exact same spot on the ground, hour after hour. At least, that's what it felt like. Hours passed or so, I thought, but the shadows refused to budge. They remained frozen, trapped in time itself. That's when I checked my phone, and found out it wasn't working. No signal, no GPS, not even the clock worked properly. The screen flickered, showing random times jumping forward and backward without rhyme or reason. 1 minute it said 3:47 p.m., the next 12:02 a.m. Then it froze entirely, stuck on 6:18 p.m. 16:18. Forever. Panic bubbled up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was just interference from the trees. Maybe I needed to climb higher to get reception. So I kept walking, hoping the trail would lead somewhere recognizable. Instead, it led me straight into the heart of madness. After what felt like hours or maybe minutes, I emerged onto a clearing unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was eerily beautiful, yet utterly unnatural. In the center stood an old clock tower, its hands frozen mid-strike. Around it lay remnants of a forgotten village, crumbling houses, rusted cars, abandoned playgrounds. All of them untouched by decay as though preserved in amber. Yet no one lived here anymore, not a single soul stirred among the ruins. Only echoes lingered in the air-faint murmurs of laughter, crying children, distant conversations that faded before I could understand them, voices out of sync with reality. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing responded except my own voice bouncing off the dead walls. As I explored further, I realized the truth. Time had stopped completely in this place. Every object, every structure, every shadow remained exactly as it had been when the world outside moved on. Watches hung from wrists, their hands locked forever at odd angles. Pendulums swung endlessly within broken clocks, never completing their arcs. Even the clouds above appeared suspended mid-drift, their edges sharp and unmoving. And yet, I could move, I could breathe, I could think. How was that possible? That question haunted me as I wandered aimlessly through the ghost town. Why was I unaffected while everything else stood still? What made me special, or was I cursed? It didn't take long for the horrors to reveal themselves. At first, they were subtle, almost imperceptible, a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow darting between buildings. When I turned to investigate, nothing was there. Just empty streets and lifeless windows staring back at me. But then came the voices. Whispered fragments of sentences drifted toward me, overlapping and twisting into gibberish. "Help. Please. You shouldn't be here." Each word sent chills down my spine, though none of them sounded human. More like echoes from another dimension, distorted beyond comprehension. Then came the figures. They weren't Pioplinot exactly. They were silhouettes etched into the fabric of reality, standing motionless in doorways, leaning against lampposts, crouching beneath staircases. Their forms shifted whenever I tried to focus on them, blurring into indistinct blobs of darkness, yet somehow I knew they were watching me. Watching and waiting. One nighter, what I assumed was night, I saw something truly terrifying. A man sat on a park bench near the fountain, his posture stiff and unnatural. His face was hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat, but his eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light. He stared straight at me, unmoving, unblinking. As I approached, he tilted his head slightly, revealing a mouth full of jagged teeth. Before I could scream, he vanished. Or maybe he didn't vanish. Maybe he simply became part of the background, blending seamlessly into the frozen tableau surrounding me. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that he and whatever else lurked here wasn't real. Not in the way I understood reality anyway. Days turned into weeks, or perhaps months. Without a functioning clock, it was impossible to tell. Time lost all meaning in this place. Hunger and thirst ceased to bother me. Sleep became unnecessary. My body adapted, or rather, it deteriorated. Slowly but surely, I began to lose pieces of myself. Memories faded. Faces blurred. Emotions dulled. The only constant was the creeping sensation of being watched. Always watched. Desperation drove me to try escaping over and over again. I retraced my steps along the trail that brought me here, only to find it looping back onto itself. Doors opened into brick walls. Windows showed reflections of places I'd never been. Maps crumbled to dust in my hands. Compasses spun wildly, refusing to point north. Eventually, I gave up trying to leave. There was nowhere to go, no one to save me. That's when the hallucinations started. At first, they were mild just flashes of color or strange smells wafting through the air. Then came the sounds. Footsteps trailing behind me, doors creaking open, whispers growing louder in my ear. Finally, the visions arrived. People materialized out of thin air, reaching for me with clawed hands. Buildings twisted and warped, melting into grotesque caricatures of themselves. Trees sprouted faces, grinning malevolently as I passed. Was I losing my mind, or was this place feeding off my fears, manifesting them into tangible nightmares? One day, or maybe it was the same day, repeating endlessly, I stumbled upon a journal tucked inside a dusty bookshelf in one of the abandoned houses. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with frantic scribbles detailing experiences identical to mine. The writer described finding the forest, entering the village, realizing they were trapped. Over time, their entries grew shorter, more desperate, until finally, "It knows I'm here." Those words echoed in my mind long after I closed the journal. What was it? And why did it want us here? The answer hit me later during another endless loop through the village. While examining the clock tower more closely, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: carvings etched into the stone base. Symbols resembling ancient runes spiraled upward, forming intricate patterns that pulsed faintly with an inner glow. As I touched them, visions flooded my mind. I saw others like medicines, hundreds, maybe thousands, Saul caught in this timeless prison. Some screamed, others wept. A few smiled serenely, accepting their fate. Each vision ended the same way, a figure cloaked in shadows stepping forward, pulling the victim into darkness. When the visions faded, I understood. This place wasn't meant to trap us, it was meant to harvest us. Our consciousness, our memories, our very essence fed whatever entity resided here. We were its fuel, sustaining its existence in a realm outside of time. And I was next. If you're hearing this, then I failed. Somehow, you found your way here just as I did. Please, don't make the same mistake. Find a way out. Leave immediately. Don't let it see you. Whatever you do, don't touch the symbols on the clock tower. I wish I could warn you more, but my time is running out, or rather, it's stopping altogether. The shadows are closing in. I can feel them dragging me under, pulling me apart piece by piece. Just promise me one thing. Tell someone about this place. Make sure they know it exists. Maybe someday, someone will figure out how to stop it. Goodbye.
Wendigo's screams echo in the woods. It was late in the evening, around 9:15 p.m., when the first scream echoed through the dense pine forest surrounding Lake Hollow, a small community nestled deep within the northern woods of Wisconsin. The air was cold and still, with a biting frost that clung to every breath exhaled. Inside their cozy cabin on the edge of the lake, the Anderson family, Mark, his wife Emily, and their two children, 10-year-old Jake and 7-year-old Lily, were settling down for the night after a long day of hiking and fishing. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls, while the soft hum of crickets filled the silence outside. Jake sat cross-legged on the floor, engrossed in a book about Native American folklore, his eyes wide with fascination as he read aloud to his younger sister. "Did you know," he began, his voice tinged with excitement, "that some tribes believe in a creature called the Wendigo? It's supposed to be this monstrous being that lives in the woods and feeds on people who wander too far from home." Lily giggled nervously, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "That's silly," she said, trying to mask her unease. "There's no such thing as monsters." Mark and Emily exchanged glances, amused by their children's banter, but little did they know how wrong Lily would soon prove to be. As the family prepared for bed, the atmosphere shifted subtly. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, sending a chill through the room that seemed to linger longer than it should have. Emily paused mid-step, her hand resting on the doorknob leading to the porch. "Did you hear that?" she asked, turning toward Mark. He frowned, straining his ears to listen. At first, there was nothing but the usual sounds of the forest at night, the rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. But then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, came a sound that made the hair on the back of their necks stand up, a low, guttural growl, followed by what could only be described as a blood-curdling scream. The family froze, staring at one another in stunned silence. "What was that?" Lily whispered, clutching her mother's leg tightly. Mark grabbed a flashlight from the counter and stepped cautiously toward the window, peering into the darkness beyond. The forest appeared eerily still, its towering trees standing like silent sentinels guarding secrets unknown. Yet, despite the apparent calm, something felt off wrong even. The air seemed heavier, charged with an energy that prickled against their skin. "I'm going outside to check," Mark announced firmly, his voice steady but masking the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. "Stay here with the kids," he instructed Emily, handing her the flashlight before grabbing a sturdy wooden bat leaning against the wall. Reluctantly, he opened the door, stepping onto the porch where the cool night air wrapped around him like a shroud. The screams had stopped, replaced by an unsettling quiet that pressed against his eardrums. Shining the flashlight beam into the distance, he scanned the perimeter, searching for any sign of movement. At first, nothing stirred. Then, without warning, a pair of glowing yellow eyes emerged from the shadows, reflecting the light like twin lanterns in the dark. Mark stumbled backward, nearly dropping the bat as sheer terror gripped his body. Whatever stood before him wasn't human, it was impossibly tall, its skeletal frame towering over him, and its skin stretched tautly over protruding bones, giving it a gaunt, emaciated appearance. Its mouth gaped wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth stained crimson, and from its throat issued a chilling roar that reverberated through the forest, shaking the very ground beneath his feet. Emily screamed inside the cabin, waking the children, who now huddled together in fear. "Dad," Jake shouted, tears streaming down his face as he pressed himself against the wall. Through the window, they watched helplessly as Mark fought desperately against the creature, swinging the bat with all his might. Each strike connected with a sickening crunch, yet the Wendigo barely flinched, its movements fluid and predatory as it closed in on him. Inside, Emily grabbed a hunting knife from the drawer, her hands trembling as she prepared to defend her family. "Stay close," she whispered to the children, her voice breaking slightly. Together, they barricaded themselves behind overturned furniture, their hearts pounding wildly in unison. Outside, the battle raged on, the Wendigo's roars mingling with Mark's grunts of exertion. Finally, with one last desperate swing, Mark managed to drive the creature back, allowing him just enough time to retreat inside and slam the door shut. Once safely inside, the family gathered in the center of the living room, breathing heavily as adrenaline coursed through their veins. "We need to leave," Mark declared, his voice firm despite the fear evident in his eyes. Now, grabbing their belongings, they piled into the car parked out front, driving away from the cabin as quickly as possible. Behind them, the Wendigo's screams echoed through the woods, growing louder and more menacing with each passing mile. For hours, they drove aimlessly, seeking refuge in a nearby town. Along the way, strange occurrences plagued their journey, objects moving inexplicably within the car, whispers echoing through the radio speakers, and fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures darting across the road ahead. By dawn, they reached safety, collapsing into motel beds, exhausted but grateful to have survived the night. In the days that followed, the Andersons spoke sparingly of their encounter, choosing instead to focus on rebuilding their lives elsewhere. Yet, every now and then, during quiet nights when the world seems most still, Mark finds himself glancing nervously out the window, searching for signs of movement among the trees. And though he tells himself repeatedly that it's over, deep down, he can't help but wonder if the Wendigo is still out there, watching, waiting, stalking its next prey. Bunnyman stole a child last night. It was a quiet evening in the small town of Willow Creek, where the air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and damp earth. The clock struck 9:15 p.m. as Emily Carter sat nervously on her porch, fanning herself against the sticky warmth that refused to dissipate even after sunset. Her younger brother, Jake, played nearby with his best friend, Lily, their laughter echoing through the quiet streets lined with towering oak trees. Unbeknownst to them, the tranquility of this moment would soon shatter into chaos. The Carters lived in a modest house near the edge of a dense forest, a place known locally as Bunny Man Woods. Tales of the Bunny Man, a mysterious figure said to haunt these woods, were whispered among locals, though most dismissed them as mere folklore. Emily, however, had always felt an inexplicable unease whenever she heard those stories. That night, her instincts screamed louder than ever before. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, Emily noticed something odd about the forest. Its usually calm surface rippled unnaturally, as if stirred by an invisible hand. A faint mist began to rise, curling lazily toward the shore like tendrils of smoke. She dismissed it at first, chalking it up to the humidity, but then came the sound, a low, guttural growl carried on the breeze, haunting and otherworldly. It sent shivers down her spine, and she instinctively called out to Jake, urging him to come inside. "Jake, time to head home," Emily shouted, her voice cutting through the twilight. The children paused their game momentarily, glancing toward the house. But instead of obeying, Jake hesitated, drawn to the edge of the forest by some unseen force. "Just one more minute," he pleaded, his eyes wide with curiosity. Emily frowned, sensing the growing tension in the air, but reluctantly agreed, promising to keep a close eye on him. Minutes later, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The sky darkened prematurely, clouds rolling in with unnatural speed, blotting out the stars and moon. A cold wind swept through the area, carrying with it the scent of salt and decay, unlike anything Emily had ever smelled before. The laughter of the children faded into silence, replaced by an oppressive stillness that pressed down on everything around them. And then, from somewhere beyond the tree line, came the sound again, this time clearer, closer, and unmistakably human. "Help me," cried a voice, high-pitched and filled with anguish, reverberating through the night. The words echoed in English, translating to "help me." Each syllable dripped with sorrow, yet beneath it lay a menace that made Emily's blood run cold. She turned sharply toward the forest, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. There, standing knee-deep in the shadows, was a figure cloaked in white, a man with long ears resembling those of a rabbit, his arms outstretched as if beckoning someone forward. "Jake!" Emily screamed, lunging toward her brother just as the child took another step closer to the edge. But it was too late. Before anyone could react, Jake slipped into the murky depths of the forest, vanishing beneath the thick canopy without so much as a splash. Panic surged through Emily as she dove in after him, fighting against the underbrush that seemed stronger than any natural force. Beneath the leaves, she saw shapes, moving sinister figures with hollow eyes and skeletal hands reaching out to drag her deeper. Somehow, Emily managed to claw her way back to the edge of the forest, gasping for air as tears streamed down her face. She searched frantically for any sign of Jake, calling his name over and over until her voice cracked from exhaustion. But there was nothing, no movement, no response, only the eerie silence broken occasionally by the distant echo of the bunny man's cries. Hours passed as searchlights scanned the forest edges and volunteers combed the woods, hoping against hope to find Jake alive. Days turned into weeks, and still no trace of the little boy emerged. The community mourned alongside the Carter family, offering condolences and sharing their own tales of encounters with the bunny man. Some claimed to have seen him wandering the forest edges at night, his ghostly form illuminated by the pale light of the moon. Others spoke of hearing his cries during storms, warning people to stay away from the woods. For Emily, the guilt became unbearable. Every night, she dreamed of that moment, the icy grip of the forest pulling her under, the skeletal hands grabbing at her ankles, and the hollow eyes staring back at her from the darkness. She began hearing things, too soft whispers in the dead of night, footsteps outside her bedroom window, and sometimes faint giggles coming from the direction of the forest. Each sound drove her further into despair, convincing her that the bunny man wasn't done tormenting her family. Months later, when winter settled over Willow Creek, bringing with it biting winds and frost-covered branches, Emily decided she couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. Armed with a flashlight and a determination born of desperation, she ventured to the forest edge late one night, determined to confront whatever entity had taken her brother. As she stood there, trembling in the cold, she finally saw him clearly, the man with rabbit ears, his face twisted into a grotesque mask of grief and rage. "Why did you take him?" Emily demanded, her voice shaking but resolute. The figure tilted its head slightly, studying her with eyes that burned like embers. Then, without warning, it lunged forward, its translucent fingers brushing against Emily's cheek before retreating into the mist. In that instant, Emily understood the spirit hadn't acted out of malice. It had mistaken Jake for one of its own lost children, drawn by the innocence and vulnerability all children share. Though the revelation brought some measure of closure, it did little to ease the pain of losing her brother. Emily continued to visit the forest edge, leaving offerings of flowers and candles in hopes of appeasing the restless soul that haunted its woods. Over time, the sightings of the bunny man diminished, as if the spirit had found peace or, perhaps, simply moved on to another place where unsuspecting victims wandered too close to the edge. Even now, years later, Emily carries the memory of that night with her wherever she goes. Every now and then, during quiet nights when the world seems most still, she hears the faintest whisper of a child's laugh or feels the chill of unseen breath against her neck. And though she tells herself repeatedly that it's over, deep down, she can't help but wonder if the bunny man is still out there watching, waiting, searching for his next child to claim. Mothman warned us before disaster. It was a crisp autumn evening in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where the air carried a chill that hinted at the approaching winter. The clock read 7:45 p.m., and the sky above was painted with hues of orange and purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. In the small town nestled along the Ohio River, life moved at a leisurely pace, but tonight would be different for the Carter family: Michael, his wife Emily, and their teenage son Jake. Little did they know, an encounter with something extraordinary was about to change their lives forever. The Carter family had gathered in their living room after dinner, settling in for a quiet evening together. Michael sat on the couch reading a newspaper while Emily worked on a knitting project nearby. Jake, engrossed in a video game, occasionally paused to comment on the news stories his father shared aloud. The atmosphere was calm, almost serene, until a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, startling them all. "What was that?" Emily asked, glancing toward the window. She rose from her seat and approached it cautiously, peering outside into the gathering darkness. Beyond the yard stretched a dense forest, its towering trees swaying gently in the breeze. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught a flash of something large and winged soaring silently through the trees. Her breath hitched and she turned back to her family, her voice trembling slightly. "Did you see that?" Michael set down his newspaper, curiosity piqued. He joined Emily at the window, squinting into the distance. For a moment, there was nothing but the rustling leaves and chirping crickets. Then, without warning, the creature reappeared, a massive figure with wings spanning at least 10 feet, its glowing red eyes piercing through the shadows like twin beacons. It hovered briefly before disappearing into the depths of the forest, leaving behind an unsettling silence. Jake dropped his controller, rushing over to join his parents at the window. "What was that thing?" he whispered, his voice filled with awe and fear. Michael shook his head, unable to offer an explanation. None of them had ever seen anything like it before. As they stood there trying to process what they'd witnessed, a strange sensation settled over Thema feeling of being watched, as though unseen eyes lingered just beyond the tree line. Later that night, as the family prepared for bed, the memory of the winged creature continued to haunt them. Unable to shake the unease, Michael decided to do some research. He retrieved an old encyclopedia from the bookshelf and flipped through the pages, searching for any mention of similar sightings. To his surprise, he discovered references to a legendary entity known as the Mothmanna mysterious creature said to have appeared in Point Pleasant during the late 1960s, coinciding with a series of bizarre events culminating in a tragic disaster. The parallels between those accounts and their own experience were uncanny. The next morning, the Carters discussed their findings over breakfast. They agreed that the Mothman's reappearance couldn't be ignored. It felt like a warning, a sign of impending danger. Determined to uncover more information, they visited the local library where they met Mr. Jenkins, an elderly librarian who had lived in Point Pleasant for decades. His eyes widened when they mentioned the Mothman, and he nodded knowingly. "Ah, yes," he said solemnly. Many people dismissed it as mere folklore back then, but those who paid attention knew better. The Mothman always appears before tragedy strikes. His words sent shivers down their spines, but they pressed him for details. Mr. Jenkins recounted stories of other sightings of people describing the same glowing red eyes, the same silent flight, and the same ominous presence. He also spoke of the Silver Bridge collapse in 1967, which claimed the lives of 46 people, occurring shortly after the last reported sighting of the Mothman. The connection was undeniable, and the Carters left the library with a heavy sense of foreboding. Over the following days, strange occurrences began to unfold around Point Pleasant. Power outages plagued the town, leaving entire neighborhoods plunged into darkness. Strange noises echoed through the woods at night-low growls and haunting whispers that sent chills down the spines of anyone who heard them. Farmers reported livestock behaving erratically, refusing to enter certain areas near the riverbank. And then came the dreams, vivid nightmares plaguing each member of the Carter family, filled with images of collapsing structures and desperate screams. One evening, as the family sat together in the dim glow of candlelight due to another power outage, they heard a deafening screech that reverberated through the air, followed by the sound of flapping wings overhead. They rushed to the window, hearts pounding wildly, and saw the Mothman once again, this time perched atop a nearby telephone pole. Its red eyes locked onto theirs, staring intently as if delivering a final message. Without speaking, they understood the gravity of the situation. That night, the Carters made a decision. Packing only essentials, they left Point Pleasant, seeking refuge in a neighboring town. Days later, news broke of a catastrophic event. A major bridge connecting Point Pleasant to Ohio had collapsed under mysterious circumstances, mirroring the tragedy of decades past. Scores of people lost their lives, and the town was left reeling in shock and grief. Though grateful for their escape, the Carters couldn't help but wonder about the Mothman's true nature. Was it a harbinger of doom, or a guardian trying to warn humanity of dangers yet unseen? Whatever the case, one thing was certain: their lives had been forever altered by the encounter. Even now, years later, whenever they hear the distant cry of birds or catch glimpses of shadows moving in the twilight, they pause and remember the glowing red eyes that saved them from disaster. In the end, the Carters learned to live with the knowledge that some mysteries are best left unanswered. Yet, deep down, they remain convinced that the Mothman is still out there watching, waiting, ready to deliver its warnings to those willing to listen. Next story. The Clapping Man of Missouri. He only comes when you clap back. It all started with a whisper in the wind, or so it seemed. I was sitting on the porch of my uncle's cabin late one evening, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring out into the darkness that stretched endlessly beyond the edge of town. It was August, and the air carried an oppressive heat that clung to your skin like a second layer of clothing. The crickets chirped rhythmically, their song blending seamlessly with the hum of cicadas. Everything felt normal until it didn't. Let me back up for a moment. My name is Alex, and I grew up in a small rural town called Willow Creek, nestled deep within the rolling hills of Missouri. If you've never been here, picture this. Endless fields of golden corn swaying gently under the sun, narrow dirt roads winding through dense forests where sunlight barely penetrates, and a quiet stillness that lingers even when the world outside seems chaotic. But beneath that serene surface lies something darker, something whispered about by locals over hushed tones during late-night gatherings at the diner or around campfires deep in the woods. You see, Willow Creek has its own urban legenda story passed down through generations, told to children as cautionary tales and dismissed by adults as mere superstition. They call him the Clapping Man. As kids, we heard snippets of the tale from older siblings or friends whose parents had warned them not to stray too far into the woods after dark. According to legend, the Clapping Man roams the outskirts of Willow Creek, appearing only in places untouched by civilization, abandoned barns, desolate fields, and shadowy groves where trees twist unnaturally toward the sky. He's said to be drawn to sound specifically, clapping. Here's how the story goes. If you clap twice or more in these isolated areas, he will come, and once he arrives, there's no turning back. Locals always added a chilling caveat. He only comes if you clap back. At first glance, it sounds absurd, doesn't it? Like some half-baked ghost story meant to scare restless teenagers into behaving themselves. But no one ever dared to test it not anymore. Not since. Well, let's just say there are reasons why people steer clear of certain parts of the forest now. Fast forward 10 years later, and I found myself returning to Willow Creek for what was supposed to be a peaceful summer break before starting graduate school. My childhood best friend, Jamie, had invited me to join her and a group of friends for a weekend camping trip near Old Hollow Lake, a secluded area surrounded by towering pines and thick underbrush. It wasn't exactly my idea of fun. I'd rather stay indoors reading books, but Jamie insisted, claiming it would help me reconnect with nature. We arrived late Friday afternoon, setting up our tents along the lake's rocky shoreline. As dusk settled over the landscape, casting long shadows across the water, Jamie pulled out a bottle of whiskey she'd smuggled in her backpack. "To celebrate," she said with a mischievous grin. We sat around the fire, laughing and sharing stories late into the night. That's when someone brought up the Clapping Man. "It's stupid," Jamie scoffed, taking a swig from the bottle. "Just another dumb legend to keep us scared of the woods. Who even believes that crap?" Her words hung heavy in the air, though none of us argued. There was an unspoken agreement among us. While most viewed the story as folklore, there remained a kernel of unease buried deep within each of us. Maybe it was the way the wind picked up suddenly, rustling the leaves overhead, or the distant howl of a coyote echoing through the valley. Whatever it was, it made the silence afterward feel heavier than usual. Then came the dare. "Fine," Jamie said, slamming the bottle onto a log. "If you guys don't believe me, let's prove it. Let's go find this Clapping Man and see if he actually exists." No one responded immediately. Instead, we exchanged nervous glances, the flickering flames reflecting off our